We trust the lamb, not the donkey or the elephant.
It is so much easier to agree on something that we're against than it is to agree on something that we're for. And I think a helpful way of describing this is the difference between a negative vision and a positive vision. So Aaron Renn, in a recent newsletter, he was exploring this idea, and he said that a negative vision is knowing what you're against, and it's gathering a group of people who rally around the same things that they're against, whereas a positive vision is knowing what you're for and rallying a group of people around what you're for. And these days, it seems like because of the cultural mood, it is much easier to gather people around a negative vision than it is a positive. You remember that infamous tweet from Owen Strachan saying, basically I don't even remember what it was about now. I just remember it ends with, bring your matches. We're showed up to burn things down today.
Think of the person who leaked the document about the overturning of Roe and the Dobbs decision, right? Now, that person thought, I guess, we don't know who it is at this point, but they thought they were doing something good, but all they were really doing is undermining the Supreme Court, undermining people's trust in the court. They just had a burn it down, do whatever I need to do at all costs to accomplish my goal. And they didn't have any sense of respect or reverence for the institution and the role that that institution, the Supreme Court, plays in our culture. They just wanted to burn it down. And I think Christians want to burn things down. You find people going after ministries or going after churches or going after leaders on Twitter, and they don't have a positive vision. They're not building a church. They're not building a ministry that feeds the homeless or that disciples at-risk kids. They're just lighting matches and taking shots. And I get it. It's easy to do. I fall into the same trap. So really, I'm not criticizing anybody before I criticize myself.
Well, but you actually just hit on the center of the problem. Not only is it easier to build around negative visions, there's a cost because you need positive visions to actually care for people, to do good inside of your community. One of the other weird things that comes with negative visions is strange bedfellows. My favorite example of this right now is the weird relationship between people like James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian. They wrote a book called Cynical Theories. It's very much so against what some people call wokeism. I don't particularly like that, but I think that's how most people identify it.
Critical theory.
What they call critical theory. And so they're very against, kind of the LGBTQ queer theory. They're against critical race theory. And it's funny because now they're strange bedfellows with all these SBC people who are also very against, what they would call woke ideology. So you've got James Lindsay coming on to Al Mohler's podcast. And what makes it so interesting is James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian, they wrote a book tearing down evangelicals.
They wrote the James Lindsay came on Albert Mohler's podcast?
Oh, yeah, this is a while back. Yeah.
I'm suspicious of that, but
I mean, to Al Mohler's credit, at the end, he kind of pushes them on some of the atheism stuff. But the point is, James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, they were atheists. They were new atheists. They were actively fighting against evangelicals. This is another fun story about Peter Boghossian. Justin Brierley was coming out to where Peter Boghossian was located to lead a debate, and he asked Peter Boghossian to come and basically debate an evangelical about God. And Peter Boghossian said, "I won't do it because evangelicals aren't my enemies anymore. My enemies are people who I would describe as woke or critical theorists or the successor ideology, and I don't want to debate evangelicals because now we're on the same team." So here's the point. They know what they're against, and so they can be friends. Because they have a negative vision.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? I mean, exactly. That's been around for a really long time. So you can easily bond with people around what you're against. But let's say that you took James Lindsay and Al Mohler or Peter Boghossian and Justin Brierley and asked them to build something together. Well, you have to have a lot of common agreement to build together, a lot of trust and common values. It just doesn't exist between groups, but they do find common ground what they're against.
Yeah. Another example, if you read Kristen Kobes-Dumay's book, Jesus and John Wayne, she is highly, highly critical of Russell Moore throughout the book. He is not a hero inside of the book.
Not anymore.
But now they seem to be buds. I mean, it's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. They're co-starring in movies. They're showing up on the same podcast. By movies, I mean documentaries, to be totally clear here. And why? Well, it's not because they share a positive vision. I still think they see the world very, very differently from one another, but they both share a negative vision. They both think that Christian nationalism is a major problem inside of evangelicalism, and they've dedicated a lot of their time and energy into combating it. And so again, negative vision has a strange power to pull together co-belligerents. But here's the key I want you to ask yourself if you're listening to this. Do you have a negative vision?
Yeah, is it easier for you to name what you're against or what you're for? Are you trying to build something positive, or are you just critiquing and trying to tear down that which you think is a problem? What do you give your mental energy to? What do you spend your time doing? Are you trying to build, say, something like a nonprofit? Maybe it helps immigrants, or maybe it helps at-risk kids. Are you trying to put that together in your community, or are you more criticizing the schools for what they're failing? So we start developing this negative identity, and we just become people who see everything through a negative lens, like we're tearing things down. Aaron Wrenn, who you mentioned earlier, says a negative identity is one built around opposition to something or someone, often, but not always, around a grievance. And I think you could even say that about us at our podcast and Truth Over Tribe and how we started.
Yeah, that's been one of the interesting things for me, reflecting on this problem, that negative visions are everywhere. A lot of people have negative identities. We know what we're against. We don't really know what we're for. We spend our time and our mental energy on what we're against, but we don't really spend it on what we're for. And I have to be honest, I think when we started this podcast, we probably had a more clear vision of what we were against than what we were for. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think there have been things that have forced us out of that, but I don't want to point at someone else and say, see, you're the problem, you're the negative vision person, without acknowledging the fact that I see it in myself.
Well, yes, like I said earlier, I'm a very cynical person, which, maybe we can unpack as we go along, and why that's the case, and why there's a lot of people like me. And I agree that we started the podcast. Our very first thing we did was we kind of did a critique of the rise of the religious right, and kind of what were their real motives, and where does the religious right come from? What's the history there, and what do we learn from it? I think, though, in naming this Truth Over Tribe, and then the book Truth Over Tribe, I think we did have something positive there that we were trying to say, but we came out of the gates. If you go back to the beginning of the podcast, listen to the beginning of the episode, or the first episodes, we came out of the gates kind of negative.
Yeah, I think we came out of the gates with a strong idea of what we were against. The people we interviewed very much so fit into that, not across the board. And again, I just want to be self-reflective and acknowledge the fact that perhaps that was because it was easier. And like you said, we did have some positive things, but I think part of it's also generational. Keith, you've already talked about you being Gen X. I'll let you talk about that in a second. But I think for me as a millennial, one of my tendencies is to be very deconstructionist in my orientation. In other words, I enter into an institution and I immediately start seeing what I think is wrong with it, what I think needs to change about it. I want to deconstruct the bad things. And that's almost all of where my focus goes. And for probably a few years early on in ministry, that's where I put all of my energy, was trying to deal with and tear down problems that I saw. And I thought it was really just, and they might have been very real problems that I was dealing with and responding to, but I began to reflect on some of those experiences and realize that I kind of took myself and allowed other people to take me for a ride in the process, because it's, again, very easy to be against and to tear down. It is very difficult to build something up.
George Carlin, the comedian, I don't know if you know him. He might be before your time, Patrick, but he had this line where he said, inside every cynical person, there is a disappointed idealist. And that's really true of me. Like I want to believe in the ideal, but I've been burned so many times that I've kind of put up a cynical shell to protect me from being disappointed. And I think a lot of people who are a part of my generation, Gen X, grew up where they had this ideal and they feel like they were let down. Gen X parents. Gen X were the children of divorced parents. Divorce rates were skyrocketing as I grew up, and my parents were divorced. And I experienced my parents being through multiple divorces. You had something like Watergate or Vietnam, Iran-Contra, where it seemed like the government was lying to you. Martin Gurry, who we had on the podcast before, he talks about how, you used to have this idea that Walter Cronkite could talk to the nation and everybody trusted him. And then more people got access to news, more people got empowered because we had more information available to us, and exposed that the government, churches, the medical institution, they weren't telling you the truth. And so we all kind of became jaded. And now we're dealing with the repercussions of a society that doesn't trust its leaders or its institutions.
Yeah. So I think you put those two things together, because Gen X and millennials are now stepping into leadership roles in most institutions. You have cynical Gen X for all the reasons you said, and then you have millennials like me who have literally been trained. I mean, in high school, I remember in an English class, this is probably for 2 or 3 years, they trained us how to deconstruct text. They would give us different lenses and they say, this is how you deconstruct it.
This is what everybody did, right? Derrida and the whole idea of...
But I mean, I didn't know who Derrida was. I didn't know. I couldn't have told you what postmodernism was. I couldn't have told you what deconstruction was, but I was being trained in a way of thinking as a sophomore in high school. This is how you read text. This is how you think about reality that I took for granted at the time. And honestly, I thought it was really fun. I mean, I really enjoyed it. It was very simple. In fact, I was able to lie my way through all kinds of book reports using this deconstructionist system, because all you had to do was take a quote and then say it means the opposite of what it means for, some Marxist, feminist, fill in the blankist reason. And that was great fun for me. It was like mental gymnastics.
Look, we're not going to go down this road, but this is postmodernism.
But I didn't know.
Michel Foucault and the whole idea that there is no grand narrative that you can trust and everybody should be suspicious because people only have their perspective as a means of demonstrating power and accumulating power for themselves. So that's why we're all swimming in this deconstruction era and cynicism and tearing things down. It's what we've been taught and trained to do. And if there's any kind of saving grace for you and I, it's that we're part of an institution, a church, a local church that's trying to build something positive in a community. It's not that you and I are good people who kind of found the right way. It's that the thing that we devoted our life to with other people is to be a part of a community that's trying to build something positive. And so we don't just get to tear down. We have to be on the side that is trying to solve problems. And so it's complex. It's hard. We have our own critics inside our own church and inside our own community. And I get where they're coming from. I can be a critic of what we're trying to do. But you know what? It's pretty tough. And the only way that you can really respect people who are trying to build is to get in there yourself and give it a shot. And I think you'll see it's hard.
I'm Patrick. Thanks for watching this video. If you're passionate about ending tribalism in the church and giving Jesus your allegiance, you're not alone. We have a podcast and a book. They're both called Truth Over Tribe. You can download the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can buy the book on Amazon. I hope you'll check them out.